This class will continue to look at the determinants of market demand, and in this case we're going to look at the second term inside the bracket, the PZ. Now PZ stands for the price of related goods. So what we're going to say here is that I'll just move the cursor onto the slide. Okay, we're going to say here that the quantity demanded, QT, per unit of time, per week or per day or whatever, the quantity demanded per unit of time depends on the price per unit and the price of alternative goods or related goods. It also depends on all of these other factors that we'll discuss later: income, taste, population, distribution of income, seasons, government, and so on. So in this session here we're going to talk about related goods and the effect of related goods, the price of related goods on the demand for a particular commodity. So we're going to start by looking at the price of related goods. We're going to use the ceteris paribus assumption, so we're going to say that the output depends on the price of related goods, ceteris paribus, holding everything else constant, holding everything else fixed. So what's the relationship between the demand for a good and the price of some related good? Now, a change in the price of a related good will cause a shift of the demand curve. That's the first point. When we have a demand curve for a particular commodity, and if the price of a related good changes, then the demand curve will shift. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. Here's the demand curve. Let's say the demand curve for petrol. Now, let's assume that there's an increase in the price of cars. Well, cars and petrol are related. They go together, if you pardon the pun. They literally go together, and metaphorically and economically go together. The price of petrol influences the sale of cars. The sale of cars influences the price of petrol and the demand for petrol. So we'll say this is the demand for petrol. So this is our diagram, the demand for petrol. And we'll assume that an increase in the price of cars, and therefore less cars will be sold. So we have our demand for petrol. Back the cursor onto the diagram. This is our demand for petrol. Demand for petrol, and we'll assume here that assume an increase in the price of cars, therefore less cars will be sold. So there'll be less cars on the road, and this is our demand for petrol. Now, if we trace through the logic here of these diagrams, we'll say, okay, what's likely to be the case is that the demand for petrol will shift inwards as the price of cars increases. So the price of petrol, let's say, is fixed at price of petrol here. Originally the quantity demanded was over here, but now because there are less cars, the price of cars has gone up, there are less cars on the road. That means at the going price here, less petrol will be sold because there are less cars. So, as the price of cars increases, the demand for petrol falls. So the two goods are related. There are two types of related good, in fact. There are substitute goods and complementary goods. And let's look at these in a little more detail. We'll start with complementary goods. These goods are positively associated with each other. As the demand for one increases, the demand for the other also increases. For example, petrol and cars are associated with one another. As the demand for cars increases, more cars on the road, there will be a greater demand for petrol. They're complementary goods. They go together. A fall in the price of a complementary good will cause the demand curve to shift to the right. A fall in the price of petrol will cause an increase in the demand for petrol and also an increase in the demand for cars. Let's pursue it a bit further. Here's a normal demand curve. Price and quantity are inversely related. As the price goes up, less is demanded. Now let's see for petrol. So we've got our demand curve for petrol here. Now let's put in our demand curve for cars. You can also see it's downward sloping. As the price of cars increases, less cars will be demanded. Now let's put in a particular price of petrol, some particular price for petrol. Obviously, by the way, the scales of these axes are not the same. You don't get many cars for £1 or £1.20 or whatever it is a litre for petrol. You don't get too many cars for that price. So the scales here on the price axis are different. However, here is the price of petrol. Here's the quantity of petrol sold every week or every month. Now, as the price of petrol falls, more petrol will be sold. So the price falls, more petrol will be sold. It's cheaper, let's say, to buy petrol. If it's cheaper to buy petrol, then perhaps there will be more cars, because petrol is cheaper. Cars will be more attractive, a more attractive way of travelling. So again, we have the relationship here of a complementary good. A change in the price of a complementary good will cause the demand curve to shift. That's the point. A fall in the price of a complementary good will increase the demand for the good. A fall in the price of petrol will increase the demand for cars from D to D1, let's say. Now, we've already seen that above, so that's just simply the complementary relationship. Let's look at substitute goods. For substitute goods, as the price of one increases, the demand for the other also increases. For example, the demand for butter and margarine, these are related to each other. So the demands for both of these products are linked. If the price of butter increases, less butter will be sold. And assuming that the price of margarine remains constant, more margarine will be sold. So if the price of butter increases, less butter will be sold. That means margarine will be substituted for butter. It's a substitute. A fall in the price of a substitute good will mean that more of that good will be demanded and less of the substitute good will be demanded. For example, a fall in the price of butter will cause the demand for margarine at all prices to fall. A fall in the price of butter means more butter will be sold. But if more butter is sold, that means that less margarine will be sold. Substitute good. For example, a fall in the price of butter will cause, let's say, the demand for margarine to fall to all prices. Therefore, a fall in the price of the substitute good will cause the demand curve for the good to shift to the left. Now, these are the only bits we need to be aware of. That changes in the prices of complements and substitutes cause the demand curve for a product to shift inwards and outwards. We need to be able to know which way it shifts according to whether they're complements or substitutes. We work out whether they're complements or substitutes by just thinking of the relationship between the goods. Butter and margarine are clearly substitute goods. Petrol and cars are clearly complementary goods. Okay, that gives us an insight into the price of related goods in our demand expression. So I hope that was useful. Thanks for looking.